Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the Cold War. So we're going to take a look at how World War II is going to affect foreign policy in regards to the Soviet Union and then the Western countries, which would be Britain, obviously the United States, and France. All right, here we go. So to kind of get an idea of where we're at in like our headspace here, um, after World War II, the Soviets were really concerned about their security. Okay, because Germany is real close to the Soviet Union, as are other kind of unpredictable countries that are around their borders. Also, they're communists. Okay, so they believe that communism would eventually replace capitalism. Spoiler alert: it does not. And so they distrust the capitalist nations, and the biggest capitalist nation at the time was the United States. Now, as far as the United States goes, we were much more concerned about growing our economy because a lot of Americans thought that it was the Depression that actually caused World War II. In many ways, it kind of was. But they wanted to promote free trade and democracy, and we believed that governments that actually had protections for human rights made them more stable and peaceful. Okay, so that's kind of where both countries are at the end of World War II. So the Yalta Conference. In 1945, the leaders of Britain, Soviet Union, United States, France, they're, well, really Britain, not really France so much, but they're going to meet and decide what to do with Germany as soon as it surrenders. So the Polish leaders had fled to Britain when Hitler invaded. So the Soviet Union liberated Poland and encouraged the Polish communists to set up a new government. But the US and Britain said that the Poles should be free to decide on their own type of government. Okay, we called this self determination. So the compromise was is that U.S. and Britain would recognize the new Polish government as long as it included members from the pre-war government. So eventually, what we're going to do is there's going to be a declaration of liberated Europe, and that is going to allow people to choose their own government. So it's going to allow for that self determination. And then, in addition, another thing they negotiated was what to do with Germany. So they decided they're going to divide Germany into four zones. Okay, so each winning country gets a zone. So Great Britain, U.S., Soviet Union, France gets a zone. And then they're going to do the same with Berlin, which is the capital of Germany. And so Germany is to pay reparations through trade goods so it doesn't destroy their economy again. And then the Allies could also remove industrial machinery, railroad cars, and things like that they thought that maybe they didn't want them to have as a result of kind of a punishment of the war. So the Soviets forced Romania to become communist, and it was clear that they would not allow Poland to have free elections and that they would eventually become communists as well. So Truman takes control. So FDR died in 1945, in April of 1945, and he died with the Soviet American relations deteriorating. And so his vice president, who is Harry S. Truman, is going to step in. Now, they're going to have another conference. So obviously, FDR was at Yalta. Now, at Potsdam in 1945, Truman's going to meet with Stalin to discuss the German economy. So, what are we going to do with Germany um, if you know if the economy doesn't recover, because if their economy doesn't recover, neither does the rest of Europe, because Germany was so industrialized, it kind of powered a lot of Europe. And so Truman was really worried that a lot of the European countries would turn to communism out of desperation if their economies don't recover. So they decided that the Soviet Union would take reparations from its territories and the Allies would let industry revive. And Truman did give some industrial equipment to the Soviet Union in exchange for food shipments to other parts of Europe. Okay. So the Truman Doctrine in 1947. So obviously, by August of 1945, the war is over on both fronts. Okay, so in Germany and in European theater and in the Pacific theater. So Truman basically scared the American people by telling them that they needed to choose between a free life and one of terror, and oppression under Stalin's communism. So, would you rather be free in the United States, or would you rather be terrorized by Stalin and communism? And so Truman asked Congress for $400 million in economic and military aid in order to support Greece and Turkey. And the idea is that if we do this, then they won't become communists too. And from this point on, Americans viewed communism as a worldwide threat to democracy that it was our duty to resist. So the Marshall Plan. So this kind of leads us into the Marshall Plan. So the European cities that were bombed to ruins, there was roads and canals were destroyed. Millions of people were sick and homeless and hungry because this was a big war, and a lot of the fighting happened in people's backyards. And so these conditions are ripe for a communist takeover. And so the plan was to spend billions of dollars to help rebuild Europe, including the Soviet Union. Okay, so, but the Soviet Union refused to take part. So they were going to rebuild, and then that way they wouldn't resort to communism as a last ditch kind of effort there. So the money was to be spent on American goods. So we were going to give money to those countries, but they had to buy American made products. And the plan was successful in rebuilding Europe, but also put more strain on the relationship with us and the Soviet Union. The Berlin crisis. So the U.S. wanted a strong Germany so Western Europe could recover economically and communism could be contained. But the Soviet Union, at this time, they wanted a powerless Germany so it could never attack the Soviet Union again. Okay, so these are two very different plans here. And so both nations pursued their aims within their occupation zones in Germany and Berlin. So June 18th, 1948, England, France, U.S. merged their occupation zones. Okay, and those three zones became West Germany, the West German Republic, and it even had its own currency. And then East Germany, what will be known as East Germany, is the Soviet occupied territory. Now, FYI, Berlin sits like right in the middle of East Germany. This is going to be an issue later on. But the Soviets were angry because Germany is supposed to be administered as one country, and when we combined, it felt like it became like an us versus, or a Soviet Union versus the West kind of idea, which it pretty much was. So they announced a new currency for the Soviet zone, and they prohibited all land traffic between Berlin and West Germany. And they hoped that this would force the Western powers to give up their plans for West Germany and surrender Berlin to the Soviets. But the American Air Force, so what happened was he didn't let anything come in or out, and so the Air Force airlifted, this is known as the Berlin Airlift, needed supplies to West Berlin for 11 months. So they brought in any supplies that they needed. And so world opinion favored the Americans because Stalin was basically willing to starve these innocent people in order to achieve his goals. But by May 1949, Stalin does lift the blockade. That October, Germany officially divided and NATO was formed. Okay, so NATO this still exists, and it's a defensive alliance basically against the Soviets. So the Iron Curtain. So the Soviets still refused to uphold the Declaration of Liberated Europe and Eastern Europe. So basically, they weren't allowing people to choose their own destiny. Okay, and so the communist countries of Eastern Europe became known as satellite nations, and they weren't necessarily under Soviet control, but they had to stay friendly with the Soviet Union, and basically the Soviet Union told them what to do, and so yeah, they were kind of under Soviet control. But the Iron Curtain separated the communist nations of Eastern Europe from the West. And so you could see, like this line right here, this is known as the Iron Curtain. Obviously, it's not really it's not a real curtain, it's just a figurative line of demarcation almost. But this comes from a speech that Winston Churchill gave in which he describes this line as an iron curtain. Okay, this actually happened at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, so it's not that far away from here. But the Berlin Wall will be erected in 1961, and it's basically a wall that surrounds. This is a map of Berlin here. So this Berlin Wall surrounds Western Germany because Berlin sits, like I said, right in the middle of East Germany, and so it separates the West from the East. Okay, and it's all around the western part of West Berlin. Okay, so this happened in 1961, and then obviously World War II had ended, but the Cold War has just begun. Okay, and that's it. That's all I got for you guys today. Don't forget to do your processor, and I'll see you later. Enjoy the rest of your day.